I never thought a broken fan could feel like a prelude to something dangerous. But there I was, crouched beside a sputtering unit in the back corner of the small repair shop I worked at, and she walked in. She wasn't supposed to be here. She never came by the shop, but when she did, the air itself seemed to hesitate. She had that way of moving through a room like she owned the pauses, the silences between people. Mid-40s, maybe, but confident in a way that wasn't loud. It was in the tilt of her head, the subtle smoothing of her jacket sleeve, the way her eyes didn't just look at you. They lingered, as if memorizing. I swallowed too fast, felt my own voice catch when I muttered, "Can I help you?" Her smile wasn't big, not at first. It was careful, knowing, like she'd seen the world do its usual tricks and decided she'd keep some secrets to herself. "I just wanted to see if you'd fixed this yet," she said, holding up a tiny fan like it had a story of its own. I nodded, trying to act casual while my fingers twitched on the toolbox. "Yeah, it should be fine now," I said, hoping I didn't sound like I was about to implode. She crouched slightly to look at my work, and that's when it hit me. The small electricity in the air that had nothing to do with wires. The fan hummed quietly between us, a small sound that somehow made the space feel intimate. She watched me tighten a screw, then leaned just a fraction closer, enough that I noticed the faint perfume that trailed her like a whisper. I caught her hand, briefly, to steady her when she shifted. Nothing remarkable, really, just a hand grazing another, and yet, my chest tightened. She didn't pull back immediately. Instead, she looked at me like she was trying to figure out if I'd noticed, if I could read the same quiet tension I felt. Then there was the pause, long enough for me to wonder if I was imagining it. The kind of pause where the hum of the shop, the smell of machine oil, even the afternoon sunlight streaming through dusty windows, feels like it's holding its breath. "Thanks," she said softly, almost as an afterthought, though her eyes didn't leave mine. I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask her why she came here, why she seemed so other. But my throat locked, and I just nodded. She straightened up and brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, that small, simple motion somehow layered with confidence and a hint of teasing. I caught myself staring. Too long. I realized I was noticing everything. The curve of her neck under her scarf, the quiet steadiness of her hands, the way she made a mundane moment feel like it mattered. And yet, I wouldn't, move closer. Not yet. She turned toward the door, paused, and looked back just for a second. That glance, it was too fleeting, too loaded to fully understand, but it lodged in my chest and refused to leave. By the time I returned to the fan, my hands felt heavier, slower. Every screw seemed to demand more attention than it deserved. And even as I pretended to focus on the repair, I couldn't stop thinking about that pause, that breath between us, the smallest touch that felt bigger than anything I'd expected. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't even know if she felt it too. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just sparked, quiet and dangerous, in a corner of the shop that had never felt alive before. And now, every time I think of that day, I come back to the same thought. I'll never forget the way she let me touch her hand, just for a moment, and how it was enough to make the world feel off balance. I didn't plan on seeing her again that week. Somehow, though, life had a way of arranging coincidences that felt deliberate. This time, it was the bookstore. She was standing by a stack of old photography books, one hand brushing the spine of a volume, as if she were afraid it might snap under her touch. I approached slowly, trying not to make my presence obvious, though I knew my heartbeat betrayed me. "Need a hand?" I asked, gesturing toward the taller shelf. She glanced up, eyes meeting mine, and for a fraction of a second, there was that same spark, like the air between us had its own pulse. Then she blinked and looked away, just enough to remind me that she wasn't going to make it easy. Maybe," she said, voice careful, almost rehearsed. I stepped closer, keeping my movements unhurried. Her hands were delicate but steady, the fingers slightly bent as if used to doing precise work. I noticed the faint tremor when she lifted the heavier book from the middle shelf. "Here, let me." I reached, and our hands brushed. Not accidental. She let it linger longer than necessary. There was a pause, a fraction of hesitation that told me more than words ever could. She sighed, a quiet, almost imperceptible sound, and I realized she was tired, more than physically. The corners of her eyes were shadowed in a way that suggested sleepless nights, maybe years of too much responsibility and not enough care. "Thanks," she murmured, but this time it wasn't polite. It was almost reluctant, like admitting something she didn't quite want to admit. I wanted to ask, to push, to find out why she looked so careful with the world, with people, even with me. But I didn't. Instead, I just watched the way she straightened the books, how her fingers lingered on the edges, how the faintest laugh escaped her when she caught a title she recognized. She didn't meet my eyes. Not really. Not fully. And that was the quiet friction between us, the pull of someone just out of reach. I could feel the weight of it in the space between our shoulders, in the way her voice softened when she spoke to me, and then hardened as if to protect herself. I reached for another book she had been struggling with, careful to let her move first, careful to let the moment stretch without pressure. And she did. Her hand brushed mine again. Slight accidental? Maybe. But this time, her lips quirked into a private smile, as if she knew she was being observed and didn't mind it entirely. There was a strange gravity to the moment, a gentle pull that made my chest ache without reason. I could see the fatigue in her posture, the way her shoulders slumped just slightly when she thought no one was looking. And yet, she stood straight when I was near, the quiet defiance of someone used to holding herself together even when she wanted to let go. When she finally lifted her gaze to mine, it lasted just a second, enough to feel her hesitation, her guarded warmth. And then she shifted, stepping aside, leaving me with the books and the residue of that unspoken tension. I didn't reach for her. I couldn't. But as I handed her the last volume, our fingers brushed once more, and the smallest spark of something forbidden lingered in the air between us. And in that instant, I knew I would replay it 1,000 times. The tilt of her head, the flicker in her eyes, the subtle warmth of her hand brushing mine. And I would never admit how much it unsettled me, in the best way possible. It was late, the kind of night where the world shrinks down to a single room and the rain drums against the windows like impatient fingers. I was helping her organize some files she'd brought from the office, old receipts, manuals, notebooks, stacked haphazardly on the floor of her apartment. She worked quietly, the lamplight catching the edges of her hair and casting shadows across her face that made her look younger and infinitely more vulnerable. We were close, closer than I expected to be. Our knees almost touched as we shifted boxes back and forth. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did, but didn't care enough to move away. My own chest tightened with the awareness, the kind that makes your heart beat in half rhythms. "You always do this?" I asked, nodding toward the disarray. My voice sounded too casual, like I was trying to mask the strange flutter of anticipation in my stomach. She glanced up, eyes soft but alert. "Do what?" Her tone had a careful neutrality to it, though I could see the hesitation behind her lips, the slight pause before she answered. "Organize things no one else would ever notice. Stay up late, get everything perfect." I tried to sound like I was joking, but my words hung heavier than intended. Her fingers brushed mine while reaching for a folder, and I froze for the briefest second. She pulled her hand back almost immediately, as if realizing she'd let something slip, then gave a small, wry smile. That tiny acknowledgement, so brief, yet so loaded, made me wonder how much she wanted to stay close, and how much she wanted to push me away. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, just for a beat, and a shadow crossed her face. A friend? An ex? I didn't ask, and she didn't offer, but the shift in her energy was palpable. She exhaled slowly, like she was bracing herself, and tucked the phone back into her pocket. The storm outside picked up, wind rattling the windows, and the room felt smaller, warmer, charged with a tension neither of us named. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the quiet gap, but my voice faltered. I could feel the weight of her caution pressing against my own impulse to lean closer, to reach out, to see if she would let me. We moved another box, knees brushing again. This time she didn't pull away immediately. I could feel the slight pressure of her body against mine, the warmth that shouldn't matter but did. I wanted to look at her, to read what she was thinking, to ask something that might unravel the careful control she carried like armor. Instead, I swallowed and straightened, pretending to adjust a folder while secretly cursing the distance I created by stepping back. She looked up, caught me glancing, and for a second our eyes locked. The air between us felt like it was charged with electricity, fragile and dangerous. I could almost reach for her hand again. Almost. The sound of rain on the window, the faint hum of the lamp, the way her hair fell against her cheek. It all made it impossible to focus on anything else. My heart wanted to move, to bridge the gap. My mind screamed restraint. And then she bent over to pick up a loose paper at the other end of the room, just out of reach. My hand itched to brush against hers, to see if the moment would crack, to see if she would let it. But I didn't. I just froze there, watching, caught between what I wanted and what I dared. We sat on the balcony, the city lights spilling like gold onto the wet pavement below. Rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the air still smelled of damp concrete, and something else, something that made my chest ache in a way I couldn't name. She leaned against the railing, arms crossed loosely, and I realized I was holding my breath without noticing. "I don't know why I keep doing this," she said suddenly, not looking at me, voice quiet but steady. I froze mid-breath, unsure if I should answer or just let the words hang between us. "Doing what?" I asked, though I already felt I knew the answer. "This. Coming back here. Pretending it's normal that we're always like this." Her hand brushed the railing, fingernails tracing the metal almost absent-mindedly. "I don't even know what it is. But I know it isn't nothing." I swallowed, wanting to tell her I felt the same, but the words got caught somewhere in my chest. Instead, I leaned back against the wall, letting the silence stretch. Long enough for her to glance at me, her eyes full of something raw and unguarded, the kind of look that strips you bare without a word. Maybe I like it too much," I said finally, almost under my breath, as if admitting it could shatter the fragile boundary we'd maintained. She turned toward me then, really turned, and for the first time, I saw hesitation and fear entwined with that subtle warmth she always carried. "You do?" Her voice was softer now, quieter than before, and her eyes searched mine like she was trying to map my thoughts without asking. I nodded slowly, trying to appear calm while my stomach twisted. "Yeah, but that doesn't make it easy." "Or right. I don't know what it makes." She laughed then, a short, almost bitter sound, and shook her head. "It's not supposed to be easy. It's this," she said, gesturing vaguely between us. "Confusing. Dangerous, maybe. And I hate that I think about it so much." Her confession hung in the air, heavier than the drizzle around us. I wanted to reach for her hand, to offer some kind of grounding touch, but I didn't. I could feel the pull between us, the gravity of something unspoken, but I couldn't cross it. Not yet. We stared at the wet streets below, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional drip from the balcony above. There was a rhythm to the silence, a kind of slow acknowledgement that whatever this was, it was no longer something we could ignore. "I'm tired," she said after a long pause, her shoulders slumping in a rare moment of vulnerability. "Tired of pretending I can just move on, or not think about it. I don't know how to stop myself." I wanted to tell her she didn't have to stop herself, that I felt the same, that the pull between us wasn't a flaw or a crime. It was something inevitable. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded, letting the silence answer for me. She turned her head slightly, eyes glistening with a mixture of exhaustion and something I couldn't name. "I don't even know if I should care this much," she whispered. And that was it. That moment, fragile, trembling, devastating. The kind of line that lodges itself in your chest and refuses to leave. She wasn't looking at me, but I could feel the weight of her words, and somehow, I knew neither of us would ever forget them. I was stacking books in her living room when I noticed the small frame on the side table, an old photograph, yellowed at the edges, of a younger version of her laughing in sunlight. She caught me looking and froze mid-step, the faintest falter in her usual composure. "That was a long time ago," she said, voice low. Her fingers hovered over the frame, tracing the outline like she wasn't sure she wanted to touch it. I lost someone a long time ago, and I never really got over it. I didn't know what to say. The words hovered between us, delicate and dangerous. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled just slightly, betraying a depth of hurt she rarely let anyone see. I didn't know, I said softly, careful not to rush her, careful not to make it about me. But I noticed the way her eyes flicked toward mine, searching, testing, as if she wanted to gauge whether I'd understand or if I'd run. She shook her head, letting out a breath that seemed to carry years of weight. It's stupid. I shouldn't still feel it. I shouldn't care this much. Her fingers tightened on the frame, and for a moment, I realized she was holding herself together with sheer will. I knelt beside her then, careful to give her space, careful not to break the fragile moment. Sometimes it's not about being stupid, I said, voice quiet, almost a whisper. Sometimes it's just what stays with us. She glanced at me then, that guarded, impossible-to-read look, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might say more, reveal the full story. But she didn't. Instead, she exhaled, a short, almost shuddering sound, and placed the frame back down. Then her phone buzzed, a voicemail from someone I didn't recognize. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen, then pressed play. A soft voice, warm and familiar, spoke words that belonged to her past. A friend, maybe someone lost. Her face softened, and I could see the flicker of memory in her eyes, the pulse of old pain mingling with quiet longing. I wanted to speak, to say something that would anchor her, but I didn't. I just watched her, noticing the small details I always did. The way her hands shook slightly, the catch in her breath, the subtle quiver in her lips. Finally, she lowered the phone, eyes meeting mine. There was no sadness now, not really. There was something heavier, something raw, something that made the air between us feel like it had been rearranged. I didn't realize how much I carried, she said softly, almost confessing more to herself than to me. I nodded, letting silence be the bridge. There was nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic. Just two people sitting in a quiet room, acknowledging something unspoken that had always been there, quietly shaping the space between us. And then she smiled, small, tentative, but genuine. Not at me, at the memory, at the truth, but I felt it all the same. It lingered, hanging in the room like a secret chord struck perfectly. I realized then, with a strange ache that ran deeper than anything I'd felt before, that something had shifted. Something subtle, almost imperceptible, yet seismic enough that I couldn't pretend the world was the same. She didn't say it aloud. She didn't have to. I could feel it in the curve of her shoulder, the tilt of her head, the faintest tremor in her hands. And somehow, that quiet, soft acknowledgement of the past changed everything. We ended up on her couch, the rain finally slowing outside, leaving the city slicked and quiet. Neither of us spoke at first. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old books, warm in a way that made it impossible to think about anything but the space we shared. She leaned back, a little tired, shoulders slumping in a way I'd never seen before, without armor, without pretending. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words felt small, inadequate, so I didn't. I just sat there, letting the silence stretch, letting it speak for us. You know, she said finally, voice low, hesitant. I've never had anyone like this. Not exactly like this. Her fingers traced a line on the armrest, careful not to meet my eyes. I nodded slowly, not sure how to respond, because the truth was too simple and too complicated all at once. I reached over without thinking, my hand brushing hers, and she didn't pull away. She didn't even flinch. It was such a small thing, a hand touch, but it carried everything we hadn't said: confusion, longing, restraint, and the quiet inevitability of what had been building between us for weeks. We stayed like that, hands lightly brushing, shoulders nearly touching, letting the hum of the city filter through the window. There was no rush, no urgency, just the recognition that we'd crossed some invisible line, that the space between us had collapsed under its own gravity. I don't want to rush anything, she murmured, still avoiding my eyes, yet somehow inviting me closer without words. Me neither, I said softly. And for the first time, I didn't feel awkward about the tension, didn't feel the pull to fix it with speech or explanation. We just existed in the same space, acknowledging it silently, letting it be enough. Her head shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, toward mine. I imagined resting my forehead against hers, just for a second, feeling the warmth and steady rhythm of her breathing. But I didn't move. The moment didn't need to be forced. It only needed to exist. The hand between us tightened, a small, mutual gesture of acknowledgement. No promises, no declarations, just recognition. We had arrived at something neither of us could fully define, yet both of us understood completely. Minutes passed, maybe hours, I didn't check. The storm outside had dwindled to nothing, leaving only the quiet of the city and the soft cadence of our breathing. She exhaled, a gentle, unguarded sound, and I realized she was no longer holding herself apart, no longer maintaining the careful distance she'd always kept. She wasn't saying it aloud, but the release in her posture, the slight relaxation of her hands, told me everything. I shifted just enough to let our fingers entwine properly, and that small gesture sealed it. Not a dramatic climax, not a cinematic resolution, just two people quietly acknowledging what had been inevitable all along. And in that silent, ordinary space, I felt it. The slow collapse into something that felt like home, like inevitability, like truth. No words were necessary. We didn't need them. The moment, fragile and complete, existed exactly as it should. I still think about that night. The quiet on the balcony, the hum of the city, the small hand touches, the pauses that spoke louder than words. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't cinematic, but it stayed with me, a slow burn that changed everything I thought I knew about connection. She taught me, without saying it outright, that love isn't always a declaration. Sometimes it's the space you share in silence, the small gestures you allow, the patience to wait while someone else sorts through their own walls. And I learned that watching someone carefully, noticing every detail, the tremble of a hand, the tilt of a shoulder, the faintest catch in their laugh, can mean more than any words ever could. We never labeled it. We didn't need to. The tension, the curiosity, the near misses and quiet confessions, they built something real between us. I found myself slower, more thoughtful, more aware of what I wanted, and, more importantly, what she needed. And she softened in ways I didn't expect, letting herself be seen without abandoning the quiet strength that made her who she was. Time has passed since then, but the afterglow lingers. Even now, when I catch the faint trace of her perfume in a bookshop, or when a familiar hum of rain taps against the window, I feel that same pull, a reminder of what can happen when two people hold space for one another without forcing it. Love, I've learned, isn't always fireworks and declarations. Sometimes it's the subtle shift in a glance, the shared breath in a quiet room, the decision to stay even when the world outside seems urgent. It's quiet, it's messy, and it's earned. I glance down at my own hands sometimes, remembering hers, the small touch that changed everything, the hand that lingered just enough to remind me of what it means to care without overwhelming. And I smile softly, because the memory isn't bittersweet. It's alive, still warm, still capable of sparking the same heartbeat, the same awareness, the same slow understanding that connection is everything. We didn't need grand gestures or perfect timing. We just needed honesty, patience, and the courage to exist in the same space, fully seen and fully aware. That's what made it real. That's what made it ours. And in that quiet, I realized something. Love doesn't always have to shout. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes, if you listen carefully, it changes everything. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?